Ahoy! Hashtag Zach here. Today I'm going to give you a battlefield tour on the ground of Gettysburg. Before I begin the tour, it's important to realize the significance of the Battle of Gettysburg and the context it was in. It was the middle of the third year of the American Civil War, where the Union, the North, was fighting against the Confederates, or the South, over the issue of secession and slavery. This was where Robert E. Lee was driving into the North through Pennsylvania to try to attack Washington, D.C. from the rear. The Union Army was put under new management, General George Meade, and they were moving up behind the Confederates and on the other side of the Blue Ridge Mountains. The armies met at a crucial road junction known as Gettysburg. It would be the most deadly battle in United States history, costing over 50,000 casualties. The course of the battle would be determined by strategic use of very important terrain and how well generals used the ground they had at their disposal. Some argue that it was the battle that determined the course of the war. The battle started here on Seminary Ridge, where the Confederates came out of the Blue Ridge Mountains from the east into Seminary Ridge. This is where the Union cavalry under General Buford made their first stand, and his command post was the Lutheran Theological Seminary, where he stood from the watchtower and the spire. This road over here was used by the Confederates to haul their supplies into the city, called Chambersburg Pike, and in the city it has been ceremonially renamed to Buford Avenue in honor of his cavalry regiment, who was able to hold the Confederate advance temporarily while the Union could bring in their forces and establish a defense. General Buford used the ground brilliantly and was able to catch the Confederates, the lead element commanded by General Hill, in a bottleneck in the only flat field surrounded by rough terrain and ridges and hills on all sides. This is a closer look at the theological seminary that Buford used as his command post while he watched the battle unfold. This is also where he first spotted Union reinforcements coming in under the command of General Reynolds from Ohio. A big element that was key to Buford's success were his light cavalry cannons. Even though they weren't that powerful compared to the average artillery of the day, they were light enough to be carried and pulled by his horses, and so they were able to be as mobile as his cavalry and be right here waiting for the Confederates when they arrived on the first day. Another big aspect of the Union's success on this first day was using surprise from popping out from places like this stone wall or this house to take advantage of the Confederates as they were moving in unawares down the narrow road. Another key aspect of the Union's early success were these fences used by the farmers to protect their wheat fields from animals. They actually served to postpone the Confederate attacks because they couldn't maneuver their large army forces and cannons around them, and they had to tear down the fences under fire from Union troops in order to advance. However, in spite of all of their valiant effort and tactical brilliance, the Union troops could not hold back the vastly numerically superior Confederates and had to fall back. After Confederate forces cleared Seminary Ridge, they took this farmhouse to be used as Robert E. Lee's headquarters. He was the general who commanded the Confederate forces and used this as his nerve center of commanding and controlling all of the operations that happened in the Battle of Gettysburg. In this building, he made a lot of the key decisions that impacted how the battle would go, including when and where to attack, where to deploy their forces, and when eventually to retreat. After the Confederates captured Seminary Ridge, they spent the rest of the day descending down into the town and taking the rest of Gettysburg. The rest of the battle would take place in the fields south of the town. After the Union forces were pushed out of the town, they fell back to this spot, and their line extended westward in that direction. They used the really hilly, rough terrain just south of the town to break up the Confederate advance and stall them till the evening, because that was when the main body of the Union troops arrived. The battle line stopped around Cemetery Hill. A big part of what saved the Union forces from being swept after being pushed out of Gettysburg was Confederate indecision under General Ewell, who was afraid to continue attacking in the evening hours. This is Stevens Knoll, at the peak of Cemetery Hill, where the Union set up their artillery battery to hold back the Confederates. The second day began with the Confederates attacking the Union from the north and around their flank to the east, but to get behind the Union lines. They did this by climbing the wooded sides of Culp's Hill. The Union commander on the field in Culp's Hill was General Greene from New York. Imagine what it must have been like for the Union troops on the second day of the battle, demoralized from being pushed out of the city and now just reinforced on this hill, defending themselves from wave after wave of Confederate attackers from the woods that they know are trying to get around behind them to attack them from all sides. It must have been completely terrifying, which is why we're now honoring General Greene with a statue. Right now, I am standing in the wheat fields that were the middle of the Battle of Gettysburg. To the north, we have where the fighting happened in the town and around Cemetery and Culp's Hill. To the west, we have where the Confederates set up their main force and their headquarters over by Seminary Ridge. To the south, we have battles around the rougher terrain, around Little and Big Round Top, two very large hills, and Devil's Den, a very rocky area. And down there, to the east, we have the main body of the Union forces along Cemetery Ridge. Although this field is smack dab in the center of where all of the fighting took place, there was not actually a lot of fighting on this piece of land specifically the first 2 days. However, on the third day, that would change. Right now, I'm at the base of Cemetery Ridge. It's a low ridge of sloping land that goes all the way up from Gettysburg in that direction, all the way down to the hills of the rougher terrain down there. It runs along the wheat field and was the main strategic point, kind of like a wall that the Union used to prevent the Confederates from attacking their main force. This is a view of the battlefield from the perspective of the average Union soldier. They would be right here behind the stone wall, using it as a fortification and pointing their guns out into this wheat field. And there are a few buildings blocking our line of sight, but we wouldn't have a weapon to fire accurately enough beyond that point anyway, so it really only bothers the artillery. But they would be up here on the hill, so they could fire over it. And if you look very closely behind the buildings, you can see the shadow of Seminary Ridge, the hill that the Confederates took on the first day of the battle. Right now, I'm on top of Cemetery Ridge, the ridge that stretches from Gettysburg to the rough terrain in the south. As you can see, there's the stone wall, and there would be the Confederate position on Seminary Ridge over there. Around the same time that Confederate forces were attacking Cemetery Hill and Culp's Hill, Union General Sickles sent his forces from the safety of that ridge over there, Cemetery Ridge, forward through this peach orchard into one of the bloodiest engagements of the whole battle. Sickles' advance was meant to counter Confederate attacks in other places and take back some initiative to try to push the Confederates back, possibly even back into the town of Gettysburg and even out of it. However, it was met by a Confederate attack at the same exact time, leading to two armies advancing upon each other in this peach orchard, turning it into a very bloody engagement. The Union forces were battered terribly and had to retreat, leaving the entire southern half of the Union position in disarray and confusion, because now there was a gap in the middle of the line where Union forces had moved forward ahead of everyone else, then fallen back behind everyone else. This would cause a ripple effect, leading to chaos all along the southern half of the battle. General Sickles was able to get his forces to regroup along Cemetery Ridge up here. However, The South would be a lot more complicated. So here we are at the southern extreme of the battlefield. Over here, we have Little Round Top. The Confederates consider attacking it, pushing forward to take the high ground so that they can sweep off of the left flank of the Union soldiers who are on Cemetery Ridge. But it is wide open, completely in the sight of all of the Union musketmen and gunners at the cannons. It would be a death trap. And besides, even if they got close enough to shoot at the Union soldiers, they're behind all of those large rocks. One Confederate general is quoted saying, "They don't even need guns to defend that. They just need to roll the rocks down on us." So the Confederates decided to go around the side towards Big Round Top. However, between the Confederate forces and the wooded Big Round Top is one major obstacle, a rocky field called Devil's Den. Devil's Den is a rocky field that has boulders and obstacles scattered across it. It created havoc for the defenders and the attackers alike because it was almost impossible to see where your opponents were until they were right upon you. Over here, we can see not only were there large rocks creating gaps in your visual range, but there were also tunnels through the rocks that made it where you could pop up in front of the attackers, behind the attackers, and the attackers could use it to try to outmaneuver the defenders. It led to heavy casualties, and the Confederates realized that they could not use this route to attack Big Round Top. Just imagine trying to fight a battle here. Even if you were able to figure out where you were supposed to go and where your opponent was, good luck having secure enough footing to actually get there. And because often all you could see would be heads and rifles and maybe some elbows sticking around corners over there or out of holes, friendly fire was a huge problem in Devil's Den because you really couldn't see uniforms. However, the Confederates persisted in their attacks and eventually conquered Devil's Den. However, when they looked on Big Round Top, they realized it was way too heavily wooded to have any sort of artillery placed on there. Even though the Union soldiers had no troops on Big Round Top, it was completely open and unoccupied. It would be pointless for the Confederate troops to move in, because look at all those trees. You can't fit your big artillery pieces through there, and the infantry can't march through there easily either. It was just like a big spot on the map where no one could really access. So the Confederates had a choice to make. Either go all the way around Big Round Top or just go straight for Little Round Top. And they chose to attack Little Round Top, creating one of the most famous engagements from the Battle of Gettysburg. So the southern border of the battle was set from these rocks and the trees of Big Round Top through Little Round Top, Cemetery Ridge, and the town of Gettysburg itself. The battle wouldn't extend beyond here just because geography contained it. It would be focused for the rest of the battle on Little Round Top and Cemetery Ridge. Now, we're going to see what it would have been like to have been Confederate soldiers attacking Little Round Top. The soldiers would use the brush and weeds that were in the crevice between Little Round Top over here and Big Round Top over there to move, protected from enemy fire, to the side of the hill. As we get further and further around Little Round Top, the ferns and rocks give way to trees, which makes it a lot easier for the attacker to move forward without being fired upon. However, if you notice, the trees are nowhere near as thick or dense as over here for Big Round Top, where it would be almost impossible to launch an attack from or drag artillery cannons through. This right here is where the battle for Little Round Top took place, on this slope up to the summit, with some trees, some rocks, and as you can hear, a lot of ferns. The Confederate attackers were mostly from Tennessee and Texas, and the defenders were of the 20th Maine, commanded by Colonel Chamberlain. Confederate attackers at Little Round Top vastly outnumbered the Union defenders. However, they climbed the hill in small groups, and so could be fought off one group at a time by the Union defenders. However, the Union defenders ran low on ammo very quickly, and eventually, when they were out of bullets, they had to resort to a bayonet charge, driving the Confederate soldiers down the hill with knives attached to their gun points back down the hill where they came from. Just imagine, you've been approaching this massive hill for hours, and suddenly, when you're just away from the summit, a large amount of Union troops come charging at you with bayonets at their gun points and take you prisoner. It was greatly demoralizing for the Confederate forces, and they would not launch a major attack on Little Round Top for the rest of the battle. The Union had defended their southern flank. With the Union having this very superior defensive position over the rest of the battlefield, the Confederates would have to find another place to attack. In summary, the first 2 days of the battle saw the Confederates, on the first day, take Seminary Ridge outside of the town of Gettysburg, and then sweep in to take the city itself. And on the second day, try to attack the Union's right flank at Culp's Hill and Cemetery Hill, and the Union's left flank at Little Round Top and Big Round Top, and approaching that with Devil's Den. Now, the Union would have to defend its center, as on the third day, the Confederates would attack there. This right here is the Union headquarters by General George G. Meade. He was the commander that was put in charge of the Union Army specifically for this battle by Lincoln himself. The building was not very big at all, but served its purpose as a command center for him to receive reports from across the whole field and make decisions based off of that. There's a statue to George Gordon Meade here on Cemetery Ridge that overlooks the entire battlefield. The evening of the second night of the battle, George G. Meade pulled back a lot of the forces that had fought on the first 2 days and put forward fresh troops so that they would be ready to face whatever the third day threw at them with soldiers who were fully prepared. This wheat field is where the battle finished. The Confederates started back at Seminary Ridge over there and came across the wheat fields in Pickett's charge, where thousands of men attacked across this field and were bombarded by Union artillery as they charged, and then when they got close to the tree line, by musket fire. Here we are at the Confederate lines, where they launched their assault. After a short artillery bombardment, their troops began crossing the field. The most surprising thing about this event is even though they knew they were marching across a field and would be under heavy cannon fire for the entire mile, their morale was extremely high, and they were all very willing to charge. However, support for this charge was not unanimous. The famous Confederate General Longstreet was a very strong opponent of this charge. He was one of the greatest Confederate strategists of the war, and was also a big commander in this battle, overseeing the Confederate attacks on Devil's Den and Little Round Top. He was strongly opposed. However, when ordered by Robert E. Lee, he still conducted the attack and had to watch his men charge into the cannon fire. This is just another look at the vast field the Confederates had to cross under cannon and musket fire to attack the Union lines. And this monument was erected at the spot where several Confederate troops did actually break through, and there was hand-to-hand fighting at the line. I can't emphasize enough how important cannons were in the defense of the Union position here. As the Confederate forces advanced across the field, it was the artillery that was tearing into their lines, causing thousands of casualties as they marched across the field from Seminary Ridge to Cemetery Ridge. Just imagine being responsible for firing one of these massive cannons. They could shoot dozens of pounds of projectiles into enemy forces up hundreds of yards away into the field. As a shout out to St. Patrick's Day, I thought I would mention the 14th Union Regiment, which consisted of a lot of Irish volunteers from Connecticut, or at least volunteers of Irish descent. During Pickett's charge, they were able to capture 200 rebel prisoners in this field right here. The day after the Battle of Gettysburg was the 4th of July. The Union forces celebrated their victory, but also mourned the loss of many troops. The Confederates retreated with a 4-mile wagon train needed to carry the wounded. After the battle, President Abraham Lincoln came to the town and gave his famous Gettysburg Address, a 3-minute speech that some say is one of the greatest in United States history. Please comment, like, subscribe, and see you next time.